This podcast represents the opinions of Tyler Barber and his guests to the show. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for the medical advice of a licensed counselor or physician. The listener should consult with a mental health professional in any matters relating to their health or the health of a child. This is the Mayo Lab Podcast with Tyler Barber.
Welcome back, guys, to the second segment of the podcast for our research report. Today we are here with Dr. Andrew Hales, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about phone addiction and the research side of things. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how would you define addiction from a research perspective, like in your eyes, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. There may be some very precise clinical definition. If there is, I'm not aware of it. Defining addictions is kind of a famously fuzzy thing to do, right? On one side, there's unambiguous addictions, like textbook drug and alcohol is sort of the prototypical case where addiction's fairly cut and dry.
Yeah.
And then there's grayer zones of problematic usage. And then, of course, there's all sorts of things that people might enjoy doing and wish they could stop, but we probably would be too much of a stretch to call it an addiction. Like eating tasty, delicious food comes to mind as something that, like, colloquially we might call it an addiction, but is it really? And so cell phone use, then, I think it's reasonable to say would fall somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah.
It can absolutely cause problems. And I think it's an interesting type of, let's say, problematic behavior because its downsides might not be as visible as some of the other things that can cause problems for people.
I agree. It's weird because it just goes right over everyone's head. Like whenever they're dealing with these consequences, they don't ever attribute it to the device that they're holding. And a lot of the time, I feel like, especially nowadays, it can be definitely focused on the phone. Like I think that could be the reason. And I think that a lot of people just not really ignore, they just don't see it. It's like the invisible thing that we don't know that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, super true.
But what kind of, do you have an idea of what kind of negative consequences could come, or even positive, honestly, but consequences that could come from being on your phone a little too much?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the positive. I'll briefly comment on that and then, of course, answer your question directly. It would not be so common if there weren't upsides to it. Yeah. So I absolutely don't want to communicate that these are bad and we should all burn our cell phones in a bonfire and go back to living the old ways. Like, people wouldn't be using them so much if they weren't getting something out of it, and they certainly are. The downsides, though, and this is actually how I became interested in it, is it can interfere with face-to-face social interaction, and humans are incredibly social animals. My main focus in my research is on social ostracism, how people feel when they're ignored and excluded by others. Okay. And it is a surprisingly hurtful experience. I mean, I think we all know on some level that it wouldn't feel very good to be ignored and excluded. But what we've discovered from the research is that it's extremely painful, more than we expected when we began the research. And in fact, very subtle things that logically shouldn't hurt people's feelings, just momentary cues of exclusion or reminders that you're an outsider, they can have these measurable and real impacts. So, for example, there's research showing that when people simply deny eye contact with you, that's sufficient to make you feel a momentary jolt of social pain, like you're an outsider, you're unwanted, or you're not worthy of attention. So I became interested in cell phone use when I realized that these subtle cues of ostracism suddenly become very relevant when we enter a world which is new. We forget this, but on societal terms, it wasn't this way even earlier in my lifetime, when we're now walking around with a perpetually present source of distraction that we can ignore people with. And we do all the time. People will, in the middle of conversations, pull out their phone. It might be to check one fact or detail. It might be a text message that they have to respond to. It may even be related to the conversation. If we're talking about an actor that was in a movie and I think, oh, I'll just look that up really fast, and then the conversation moves on without me, and now I'm in my phone looking up the name of the actor, that disconnects people in ways that I can elaborate on if you want, but that's the idea at least.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I would absolutely love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, we've done experiments in our research lab here at the university looking at how these brief moments of being excluded when someone's on their cell phone can affect what we call people's basic psychological needs. Humans, as I mentioned, they're very social animals, so they have a deep need to belong. Mm-hmm. But they have other needs as well. We need to feel like we have control over our environment. We need to feel at least somewhat good about ourselves, right? Self-esteem, everyone needs that. And we also need to feel like our existence matters and we have some sense of certainty about what we should be doing or what's going to happen. Interesting thing about ostracism, and I'll get to cell phone use, is it threatens all of those. And so we hypothesize that when someone uses their phone, even for just a brief moment, it could affect those basic needs, and it could also change people's mood, or to use the jargon, the positive affect that people have. So in some earlier research I'd done in the past, we found that when people think of a time when they've been talking to somebody and they start using their phone, sure enough, it causes measurable and strong threats to those four basic needs compared to situations where they're just talking to somebody, having an ordinary conversation.
Wow.
So then in this newer research, we wanted to see what would happen if we could measure people's reactions in the moment when they're talking to somebody who starts using their phone. So we used some software to record people's emotional experience second by second when they're speaking with a conversation partner. In this case, it was sort of a simulated conversation because they have to be giving these ratings while they're doing it. Yeah. But they're viewing this video, imagining having a conversation with somebody, and during the video, several times throughout it, the person who they're having this conversation with keeps looking at his phone. And we can see within seconds, when someone's conversation partner starts using their phone, their mood ratings start going down. And you can see it in real time. These are not subtle differences. They're not small ones. They're big and measurable. So that's the bad news. The good news is that people start to recover pretty quickly, which also makes sense. It's not, we've also seen from our own experience, if someone uses their phone in front of you, you're not devastated for the rest of the day, but you feel it for a moment, and then you start to get back to baseline. And so that's the main thrust of what we found.
Gotcha. That's actually really cool that you guys did a study on that. I think that's awesome. Did you, I guess, since the study, was this study recent?
Yeah, this was just within the last year or two that we ran it, and then it was published last year.
Gotcha. That is awesome. So I guess it's been a little too short of time to kind of see if there's long-term effects of all these short-term instances, right? Like there's no like long-term right now that we know about.
Yeah, that's a great question. We could think on different timescales. There may be research on what happens over months and years, and if there is, I'd be curious to know about it, but I don't want to speak too much on that.
Yeah.
But on the shorter time scale, something really interesting happened in our experiment, which is that every time the conversation partner started using his phone, mood goes down. And then he stops using his phone, and it comes back up.
Gotcha.
but not all the way to where it was.
Really?
And he starts using his phone again, and it goes down again. And then he stops, and it comes back, but not all the way up. And he starts using it again, and it comes down again. And so the result is, if you were to look at a graph of this, it's this seesaw pattern going up and down, up and down. But then you zoom back, the overall pattern is going down. There's accumulating negative effects of this within one conversation. And then by the end of it, presumably within a couple minutes, people are back to baseline. But you can witness within one conversation. It's almost like people get a license to do it once or twice, but then they start doing it a lot, and it causes bigger problems.
Yeah, gotcha. That is really cool and really interesting. So do you know of any, I guess, like, rehab wouldn't be the right word. It's not, I guess, technically an addiction, but are there any, like, things that we can do to try to, avoid this happening to us, or us getting kind of caught up in our phones so much?
That's a great question. I try to be mindful myself. I realize it's not very actionable. Saying be mindful is sort of a sophisticated way of saying just don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that simple.
Yeah, I agree. With the guest that we had on earlier, I actually was talking to him, and we talked about the whole, like, abstinence is the best way. But that is not, it's so simple, but it's just not really something that you can, put your finger on. Nothing you can actually do. So
yeah.
I guess there's nothing that we can really.
Well, let me speculate here and see if we can come up with some ideas. One interesting trigger of cell phone use that perhaps becoming aware of the trigger will help people notice when they can use it or not is, one way to frame the question of why people use their cell phones is because people use their cell phones.
Yeah. And
that's not as circular as it sounds. Cell phone use is contagious. So there's some really great research tracking how often people use their phones out in public spaces. Mm-hmm. And what they find is this contagion effect where there's a group of people. When one person starts using their phone, the odds that within the next 10 seconds someone else will start using their phone, they go up a lot.
Gotcha.
So you might become aware then that when you're talking to one or more people and one of them starts to use their phone, and I feel this myself viscerally, right? Because now I'm unoccupied and you almost feel like I'm sitting here like an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? What do I look at? Like, what do I do with my hands and my attention? And so that's a vulnerability moment where you might, because they're going to stop. They're going to put their phone away. And then if you're on yours, now you're staggered. And,
Romeo and Juliet situation.
Totally. Yes. So, I was joking about mindfulness a moment ago, and here I'm not speaking from research so much as just speculation. I think there's something to be said for taking a deep breath, noticing that nothing bad is happening to you at that moment. Mm-hmm. In fact, it might be a nice day outside. Maybe there's a nice breeze going and you're in a pleasant environment. Just notice that. Yeah. Take a minute. Think about what's on your mind. You can occupy your attention without needing to be in a phone every single second of the day.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that if we just connected back with the world a little bit more, that we would all be, I guess, happier would be the right, I guess it's a really broad term, happier, but you know what I mean? Like your quality of life, I feel like, would definitely go up if everyone were more connected with what's going on here and now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I have another question for you. Do you have any research that you guys have done on, I guess, the role that social media would play in like the psychology and how people feel?
Yeah, that's a really big question.
Yeah.
There is research on it. It is outside of my expertise. I have not read all of the research on it. There is a lot of it. So again, I'm happy to speculate.
Please.
This is coming from more of a informed, curious observer than a researcher. But as far as I'm aware, there are studies showing that people who use social media more, experience worse outcomes like mental health, stress, things like that. And there are other studies that don't find that.
Gotcha.
From what I understand, it's kind of a messy, complicated literature.
Yeah.
I wonder if all of those studies are missing the point or thinking about it at the wrong level.
Yeah.
If we want to know if social media is harmful to people, it's intuitive enough for social scientists to, well, look at people. And you think the ones who use it the most should have the worst outcomes if it's bad.
Yeah.
I think that's overly simplistic, though. As we mentioned a moment ago, these technological changes happen pretty abruptly. And they change the fabric of how society communicates with each other now. And it seems likely to me that social media could be causing a lot of negative effects. It could cause negative outcomes for the reasons that maybe you've heard or thought about before. It invites us to compare ourselves to people who appear happier, but of course we're not seeing the full picture. We're only seeing those glowing moments they choose to share. It can make us feel bad because we might post something and then obsess over who's liked it or who hasn't. It can cause stress in a polarized society where algorithms are designed to feed us things that outrage us, to keep us clicking. That keeps me up at night. I'm worried about all of that. But as I mentioned earlier, people keep using it. So I assume there's value in it, and I assume if it makes people miserable, they'd stop.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are people who maybe opt out of using social media. And if social media is bad for mental health, those people should be happier, right? I think that's too simple a way to think of it. Those people may be unhappy because now they're disconnected for a different reason.
Yeah.
But because society decided so abruptly that we're all going to start doing this social media thing together, I think I am speculating, but I'm interested in the idea that social media has made people worse off for different reasons. Some of them worse off because they're using social media, which has these negative elements, and others because they'd be disconnected if they didn't. And the truth is, very few people are even off of social media. So imagine if all of your friends want to go see a movie that you're not interested in seeing. It's just a really, truly awful movie. And they think it's going to be good. You think it's going to be bad. And so you say, I'm going to hang back. And they all go and see the awful movie. They're unhappy because they just went and saw a bad movie. And you're unhappy because you're disconnected and you're no longer in the loop.
Yeah.
And so, I think it would be mistaken to say, if awful movies make people bad, then people who don't go to the awful movie should be happier. Well, not quite.
Yeah. Okay. That's actually really interesting. That's a really good way to look at it, too, because it kind of highlights the fact that maybe it's not just social media. It's just like social media amplifies the opportunities for those to exist, for that instance to happen.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
But I really appreciate you coming out here today. And I think that wrapped up pretty much what we were going to talk about. So again, I'm very happy that you came, and thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely. And for anybody that hasn't listened to us before, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you haven't already, follow us on the Mayo Lab Podcast on Instagram. And till next time, keep the conversation going.